Welcome to Executives at the Edge, a podcast brought to you by MEF. I'm your host, Pascal Menezes. Join me as we explore thought-provoking perspectives from the leaders and changemakers who are propelling enterprise digital transformation forward.
We are listening back to GNE 2024, bringing you the voices, ideas, and energy from the main stage. Today we're featuring one of the most talked about GNE sessions, where pop culture meets tech strategy in a fresh take on how NaaS is transforming the industry. Lumen's Dave Shacochis explains what Taylor Swift can teach us about network as a service. Let's get into it.
All right, so who's ready to learn a little bit about Taylor Swift and what she means to networking as a service?
My name is Dave Shacochis. I work in product and technology at Lumen. Lumen is one of the largest, most deeply connected fiber service providers in North America. Our mission is to connect people, data, and applications quickly, securely, and effortlessly. And I imagine some of you are wondering if I can land the plane here. Maybe that's why you came. You think I'm maybe going for like the most clickbaity title of the MEF event this year, or whether BuzzFeed took over the agenda planning. And I'll admit, the reason we sort of organized the talk this way, our CTO, Dave Ward, came in yesterday, gave a great diamond keynote yesterday, really talking about how Lumen's place in the MEF community and some of our network challenges and some of our network strategies that we're working our way through across the industry. He gave a great presentation, so we thought we'd have a little fun with this executive presentation today. But I'll have you know, the idea for this talk is rooted in some deep science. This talk dates back to a little over a year ago, right, in Seattle, at Lumen Field. It started with a rumble, a slowly oscillating wave pattern, repeating faster and faster over time until its volume changed the world. And that was certainly true for the 70,000 who were in attendance. Right, they're celebrating the breadth and the volume of Taylor Swift's Eras Tour. And it created a minor earthquake, captured by the seismometers in downtown Seattle. So literal earthquake. But the pattern of that seismograph has deeper meaning too. When you look at that oscillating wave pattern, repeating faster and faster over time, building in volume until it literally moves the world. So you could probably look at that waveform as a bit of a metaphor for Taylor Swift's career. So let's break that down. What are the two dimensions of that waveform? That waveform is based on these two dimensions that Taylor Swift has harnessed to create this era-spanning music career, right? A polarization function, a polarizing cycle fueled by different perspectives on her music, and a longevity function that builds value over time. Maybe Taylor's been singing about this in her lyrics all along, right? The players and the haters, shake it off, right? Looking back on your entire career, looking back on the timeline, to look on how you build value. So let's map that out. Let's take that to the next logical area. Let's break down that waveform. When you map it out, you can see that the eras of Taylor Swift's career have built this polarization function between lovers and haters, and her music releases over time. Right? There's the debut era, right, where she's new to the scene, took country music by storm, really appealed to her core young female demographic. That started to branch out into the fame era. Right, a lot more public friction with some artists, the famous Kanye interruption, right? Some romantic relationships with others, cemented her status as a mainstream celebrity. Then we shift into the star era, right? A reinvention as a pop musician, lots of #1 hits, a major tour, 1989, and starts to build a little bit of an ecosystem of people who really want to come out and perform with her, right? That was a big hallmark of that tour, right? Lots of guest stars, lots of her peer ecosystem starting to build. Then we go into the reputation era, right, where she went MIA after some other high-profile controversies, really came out swinging with songs like Look What You Made Me Do. And then, of course, there's that Netflix documentary, which sort of kicked off the cycle really started to pick up steam. And this is what you start to see in these waveforms, picking up steam, moving faster as we get into things like the Lover era, starts to use her platform to comment more on social issues. The whole world pulls back because of the pandemic, and so Taylor Swift responds by, really reinventing herself as more of a folk musician and taking on more folk songwriting. And then we end up in the superstar era, right, with the release of Midnights, the Eras Tour, cements her status as a global superstar. Her career started with a rumble, right? A slowly oscillating wave pattern, repeating faster and faster over time until its volume changed the world. So, personal side note, I have 3 Generation Z Swifties on my personal payroll, if you know what I mean, my kids. And I ran this model past them, and they looked at it and said, yeah, Dad, that checks out. I think you've got, and this may be the most interesting presentation you've ever given in your time there at Lumen. But I think this waveform is also pretty similar to the evolution of network as a service that many of us have seen across our careers. You know, for our industry, network as a service has been dealing with similar waveform across a range of technology eras. Right? There's a polarization function between centralized platforms from the major technology builders and decentralized data from smarter and smarter devices. There's that longevity function that the longer it runs, generates more data for machine learning and artificial intelligence to develop into value over time. Our industry started with a rumble, a slowly oscillating wave pattern, repeating faster and faster over time, until its volume changed the world. So for the fundamentally centralized models we see on this framework, right, the mainframe era, the cloud era, the AI training era that we're right in the middle of, high capacity, optimized networking is absolutely critical. But for the fundamentally decentralized models we see during the client-server era, the IoT and edge era, and this upcoming AI inferencing era where we're starting to take those models and deploy them in sometimes challenging, hard-to-reach places within the built environment, security policy management is more important. Network simplicity is more important in those decentralized models. So another personal side note, I happen to work with, as many of you do, some Generation X network gearheads, and I ran this model past them, and they said, yeah, Dave, that checks out. So the parallels between the two are interesting. The one big difference is that we're all still right in the middle of this. We're not looking back on these eras. We are right in the middle of. There's a lot of question marks on those eras because they're all starting to overlap. The cycles are really speeding up and overlapping with each other, and that's driving a lot of dynamism. So let's maybe click it forward here and take a look at what are some of the lessons learned. Let's break that down. Let's sort of back out what those dimensions mean for network as a service. The lessons we've learned across all these technology eras derived from the polarization and the longevity of all the invested stakeholders in our networks. There's a polarizing cycle fueled by different perspectives on app centralization and decentralization that really ties to making the user experience as interactive and engaging as possible. And then there's the longevity function that builds value over time, which means enabling dynamic connectivity across people, data, and applications developed in each era. So let's look at some of the implications across these lessons learned. First, let's start off looking at that polarization function, right? The main lesson we learned here is that the customer and the end developer experience are vital. You've got cloud and AI builders that want to have the flexibility to use the network at different layers of the OSI stack. Right? And then you've got enterprise users that need to have valuable features that are easier to consume. And so what NaaS means is being able to have programmable underlays and programmable underlays at different layers of the OSI stack, as well as programmable overlays. For a decade, a lot of enterprise network service delivery had the implicit assumption that customers would come in and engage with you at one layer of the OSI stack and basically stay there forever. But this AI-centric future is driven by multi-cloud sources of data, and the need for composable, API-driven architectures that are built for flexibility and scalability are so important. So our framework for this is what we call private connectivity fabric that can adapt to any enterprise, whether you're optimizing a network with lit optical services or offering up like higher level framing or overlay routing. Agile networks that meet the demands of all these massive data loads in a fundamentally multi-cloud topology. The lesson we've learned from this longevity function is that architecture across computing eras is vital. Right? Data and applications developed in one era need to be integrated across the IoT, edge, cloud, premise, and even mainframe data sets that still exist within the enterprise. Right? As more enterprises start tackling the implication of these AI strategies, they're realizing that whether they're a builder that is training a model or whether they're a user that's just subscribing to an AI service, an AI strategy means integrating your computing environments with access to all the right development tools, all the right chipsets, all the right air-conditioned facility space, with a data enrichment strategy across all your applications in whatever era that they were developed in. And this all requires an increasingly high-performing network strategy and a network connectivity strategy to make it all work. So our approach to this at Lumen is known as, again, Private Connectivity Fabric, with a digital-friendly experience and a consumption-based business model that helps our customers align consumption cost with value. So when you combine those two dimensions together, there's one other interesting implication. Some of the network models we rely on have deep roots in older eras that no longer meet the needs of a rapidly evolving industry. And Dave Ward talked about this a little bit yesterday in his presentation in his Diamond keynote. The 90s era architecture is maxed out. The meet me room model that was invented in the client server era and the public cloud era is no longer working. And to meet the demands of AI era connectivity, the fiber grids are stretching and morphing. We're going to places where power is more available. We're going outside of the natural conduits. We can look at this on maps and we can kind of understand this inherently. As power requirements are leading data center operators and GPU as a service startups with deep integration upstream into the chip manufacturers, hyperscalers, they're all pulling further away from these established national fiber pathways. So the connectivity demands of the AI era are really leading us away from meet-me rooms towards meet-me metros, where high-capacity fabrics can be built across all the sources of data in a fundamentally intercloud model. So this meet-me room architecture we focused on for a decade is starting to show its age. As we push for higher bandwidth and more dedicated connectivity, we need to rethink how these things are designed and built. And rethinking and reimagining some of these business models that no longer work for us sort of reminds me of one other interesting Taylor Swift parallel. So there's an article link up there that does a really good job of breaking it down, but Harvard Law explains this topic really well, but it's fundamentally about reinventing a business model. So in case you don't know the story, in music there are two types of copyrights, right? There is a copyright for the musical work itself, typically controlled by the composer or the songwriter, and then there's a copyright for the recorded work, which is typically controlled by the recording label. And anytime that music gets played, both of those entities get remunerated. When the sale of much of Taylor Swift's early recorded work was passed off to a recording label that was inconsistent with Taylor Swift's values and personal brand, she thought outside the box and made the decision to re-record all that earlier work and completely redo it and then issue them all as, the Taylor's version that she re-released. This move paid off because the Taylor's version became the much more popular version of those recordings to stream. It became the much more popular version that people would play on the radio. They were all major commercial and major critical successes. But ultimately it came down to how Taylor Swift reinvented the business model that no longer worked for her. So let's sum up. What can Taylor Swift teach us about network as a service? First thing, understand your polarized stakeholders. Engage with them both in a user experience that pulls them a little bit closer to the middle, helps them understand what the network can do that they didn't otherwise realize and makes those features available. Your entire catalog of data over time creates immeasurable value, and our networks are really time machines for that data, being able to go back and forth into all the different technology eras that are creating data for the enterprise. And then the third is to think outside the box and potentially look at network as a service as a way of reinventing business models that may no longer work for different parts of our industry. So this all started with a rumble, right? A slowly oscillating wave pattern, repeating faster and faster over time until its volume takes off and changes the world. So maybe these lessons resonate for you in your approach to network as a service, or maybe I just gave you some sound bites that will help you relate to some of the Swifties in your life, or maybe, hopefully, a little bit of both.
Thanks for joining us for Executives at the Edge. Don't miss an episode. Subscribe today. Share online and review. Find all our episodes on your favorite podcast platform and at MEF.net.